Well, let's continue to analyze the situation in Syria. John Laughland, political analyst from the Institute of Democracy and Cooperation, now joins us on the line from Paris. Thanks for being with us. With this latest announcement of a new batch of sanctions against Syria, Western countries seem relentless in their efforts to press President Assad to go. Why do they want that so badly?
Well, it's part of their general program of regime change across the Middle East. We've discussed on this channel on several occasions how the Arab Spring is in fact a program for installing pro-Western regimes across the Arab world. We've also discussed how, of course, behind Syria there is the far more important target of Iran. Syria is one of Iran's most important allies in the world and certainly in the Middle East. So whoever targets Syria targets Iran. But I think there's another element to this, and I'm sure this is one that your viewers and your editorial staff are well aware of. There's another target behind these constant attacks on Syria, and that is, of course, Russia herself. Why have the Western powers, Britain, France and America, repeatedly brought draft resolutions to the UN Security Council, knowing that Russia would not accept them, Russia and China would not accept them? Sergei Lavrov has said several times that he won't take sides and that the international community shouldn't do so in the Syrian conflict. The answer to that question, in my view, why have they brought these resolutions knowing that they would fail, is precisely in order to paint Russia in the eyes of the Western public as supporting a bloody tyranny, namely President Assad's regime in Syria. In other words, the very drafting of these proposed resolutions is itself a diplomatic attack on Russia, as well as, of course, being, as you say in your question, part of an attempt to overthrow Assad in Syria.
Speaking of that criticism on Russia, Russia has at least seemingly been more criticized by the West for the double veto, which of course was also vetoed by China. Why does this reaction to China's decision seem a little less harsh?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because that's what I was going to say. You only have to see the truth of what I said in my first answer. You only have to compare, as you've asked me to do in your question, the attacks on China and the attacks on Russia. The attacks on Russia are far more virulent, and in particular, of course, Vladimir Putin is singled out. You will often see demonstrators, whether they're in Syria or abroad, showing Mr. Putin and Mr. Assad with bloody hands, you know, as if to imply that Mr. Putin was somehow involved in the violence in Syria. The fact is that ever since Putin announced his intention of running for the presidency, the West has been gunning for him. And these attacks that we're seeing against him, but not against Hu Jintao, the president of China, are part of a two-pronged strategy against Putin. Two-pronged, I mean, on the international level, to discredit him at the international level by portraying him as supporting tyrants in the Middle East, and of course on the domestic level by portraying him as committing electoral fraud in order to win the parliamentary elections and possibly the presidential ones, and as someone who, as it were, cracks down on dissent at home. I'm referring, of course, to the protests in Moscow. So these are the two images that are being peddled now very vigorously in the Western media against Putin. And the purpose of that, of course, is to make sure that he is as discredited as possible in the eyes of the Western media by the time he, as everybody expects, gets elected on the 4th of March.
Critics in terms of Russia and China, who imposed the foreign involvement, of course, in Syria, what we've been talking about, critics are saying that China and Russia, will have to bear the responsibility for further bloodshed. Is it fair to argue that Russia and China could say the same about Western allies and what happened with the UN mandate in Libya?
I absolutely agree with that. Of the many remarks made by Western politicians following the Security Council vote, I thought that was one of the worst. It is, of course, true, as you suggest in your question, that intervention can itself make things worse. And I think that's true not just of military intervention. It's pretty obvious to me that in Libya, the military intervention made things worse, in spite of what the Western powers claimed. The most conservative estimates are that 50,000 civilians were killed during the NATO operation. And that's surely far more than would have been killed, even if the worst propaganda had been true about Colonel Gaddafi. But the same is true of political intervention. We saw this in Yugoslavia, in the breakup of Yugoslavia in 1991. As soon as the international community starts to get involved, even politically, never mind by sending in bombers or troops, even politically, as soon as it starts to get involved in a civil situation of civil unrest of this kind, then the tables are tipped in favour of the rebels, in the country in question. They're tipped because those people think that they can rely on foreign support, political or military, and it weakens, as it were, the government's position, and it strengthens them in their battle against the government. So foreign intervention of both kinds can make things worse because it distorts the natural mechanisms which exist inside any country for resolving a conflict of this kind.
Right, John Laughland from the Institute of Democracy and Cooperation in Paris, thank you very much for your analysis.